You're watching the New Stack Makers, a podcast for people who develop, deploy, and manage at-scale software. For more information and articles about at-scale technologies, please visit thenewstack.io. Now enjoy the show. Hey everyone, today I'm so glad to be talking to Ilan Rabinovich, who is the Senior Vice President of Product and Community at Datadog. But our topic today is the Scale event, and Ilan is the conference chair of the Scale event. We're going to be talking about the history of the event. Now, Scale, if you who do not know it, it's the annual Southern California Linux Expo. It's taking place March 9th through 12th at the Pasadena Convention Center. It's the largest community-run open source or free software conference in North America. It's held annually in the greater LA area. It is one of the most interesting events, I think, because of the caliber of the people that come to this event and who talk at the event. It really focuses on open source, and I know you've been there since the beginning, Ilan, so thank you for joining us. I'm really looking forward to hearing some stories. Now, you were there right at the beginning, weren't you?
Yeah. So a lot of us that are still involved with Scale started off working on Scale back in 2002, and most of us were, at some point in our college careers. Actually, we thought we were fairly naive kids, and we thought if we want to see all of our favorite open source developers come talk about the things they're doing, if we start a conference, they'll have to come. Turns out it's a little bit more work than just putting up a website and saying we're having a conference. But 20 years later, a lot of us are still, we've had a couple of people come, a couple go, but most of us are still involved. So it's been a lot of fun.
So take us back. How old are you at the time?
Probably 18, maybe 19.
18, 19 years old.
Yeah.
And where are you going to school?
I was at UCSB, University of California, Santa Barbara. A lot of the history of Scale comes from, the LA area back when open source was still relatively new and Linux was still fairly hard to get up and running. There was lugs on every corner. I think we had like 25 lugs in the LA area at one point. And so there was a vibrant open source community in the LA area, but LA being what it is, like there's a bunch of freeways and traffic between every one of those meetings. You're probably not running into a lot of your friends in the open source world other than maybe online. And so what we initially had done was we ran an event called Lugfest in the LA area, in a city just near LA called Simi Valley, where all the lugs got together once a year. And, rather than having your Thursday or Saturday lug meeting for an hour, we had like an entire day of just lug activities. So we did that maybe twice a year for a while. And then, Nortel, which was donating the space for us to do that, went belly up and shut down the facility they were giving us. And so we had to look for other things. And so, that's around the time I started off at UCSB. A bunch of other folks were at UCLA, USC, CSUN, other schools in the area. And we just kind of said to ourselves, what if we start a conference instead of doing this, basically lug reunion every year? And that's how we landed on Scale. And so at the time we were a one track conference on campus at USC. I think we maybe had 250 people show up. Just up until the pandemic, we were seeing like 3,500 people annually. So it's a pretty good. It's scaled a bit.
It's very interesting to hear about the number of Linux user groups in the LA community at that time, which then makes sense of where it is today, because at that time, Linux was really quite nascent, but with multiple Linux user groups around the LA region, now it's one of the biggest metropolises in the world, but still, that speaks to its scale, so to speak.
At the time, I think where we were with Linux was you succeeded when you had help from others. You succeeded when you engaged with the community. It was, it wasn't just download your 35 Slackware floppy disks and go ahead and try to get it installed. It was really like we learned from each other's expertise and knowledge. And that's what we wanted. We wanted Scale to be a continuation of that. And so that's where we focused over the last 20 years. And, while the event started specifically about Linux, and you can look at sort of who our initial speakers were, it was, kernel developers and folks that were early in Linux development. These days we cover a whole bunch of different topics, right? Just as we've grown in our careers and our
Right.
areas of interest as the organizers, and as the community has grown, we're covering a number of other topics these days. So it's, we have everything from other operating systems like FreeBSD running training days and workshops to the CNCF is joining us with Kubernetes Community Day LA just a few days prior to Scale as sort of lead-in events. A number of the volunteers that are part of planning the event have gone on to careers in security or software development or other areas, and so they're all leading tracks and programs around those areas of interest. So I think a lot of times people hear the word Linux and they're like, oh, okay, well that's great. I'm really interested in that, but these days, I don't know, I want to spend my time on Kubernetes, or I want to talk about the applications that run on Linux or the use cases. And the reality is that's where we are. That and the fact that Southern California Linux Expo is a mouthful is the reason we've sort of switched to using the name Scale for most things.
Mm-hmm. Now, if you go to the Scale site, everyone who's listening to the podcast, SoCalLinuxExpo.org, check out the previous events that they still have their sites up for those previous conferences. And it goes all the way back to the first one. And there's a few things that struck me. First of all, Rasmus Lerdorf, someone who I think people who know, content management systems like WordPress or even Facebook, I mean, he was the inventor of PHP. Yep. Tell us how you knew Rasmus. Was that just through the lugs? I mean, how did you find Rasmus as your speaker?
Honestly, most of the speakers we've had we got at Scale in the early days. We emailed them and said, "Would you come speak at the event?" We ran we ran a call for proposals, and some of them came in as submissions, but a lot of it was just cold outreach. And I don't know if that's because I don't know if that's succeeded because that's the state of where the community was at the time and there wasn't as much demand, or just because, or out of sheer dumb luck. I assure you it wasn't skill or any sort of network that we had. But we just, we managed to do that. And that's continued through today. Like these days when we run our call for papers, we get hundreds and hundreds of submissions, and, that makes it really hard to choose from. But also we just, how do I, we didn't exactly, Ken Thompson is one of our keynotes this year. Ken Thompson created Unix when he was at Bell Labs. He created Go at Google, UTF-8, Plan 9, a whole bunch of other, technologies that are foundational to how we think about computing today. We scoured the internet, found a Gmail address, and tried it on a lark. And, he responded saying he'd love to join us. So, these are not, Lawrence Lessig, years ago, we had him as a keynote speaker talking about some of the political and legal sides of open source and content sharing and free software. Similar, like I wish I could say we have this, this very deep network of connections. It's just these folks are surprisingly approachable, despite, even after years and years of doing amazing work. So
it's easier to do when I think at least it's easier to do when your focus is on knowledge and learning, which has always been a core theme of your event, right?
Yep, exactly. And so last year we had Vint Cerf speaking, which was super exciting. Get the guy that helped create the internet that you and I are speaking over today, inventor of TCP/IP. Got to join us on stage and talk a little bit about where he sees the internet going and what things he would have done differently. Over the last several decades. So, this is one of my favorite parts of Scale, is just getting to meet these amazing folks that have built the technologies that my career depended on. Wouldn't have let me be here today. So,
what did it do for your career?
So I think career-wise, all of the software, right? Like if it wasn't for Linux and, what Linux, PHP, TCP/IP, any of the technologies we just talked about, whether it's the cloud or monitoring or any other purposes my career is focused on, those couldn't exist without these technologies. As far as Scale, I think it got me out of my, what Scale did for my career. I think it got me out of my my usual comfort zone, which was my career was mostly as an engineer. I was building systems and platforms for startups that were operating on the web. So folks like Edmunds.com or Yala, et cetera. And what Scale got me to do was to start doing the people part of those jobs, not just figuring out where the code needed to go and how to run it, but how do you build a sponsorship program that collects money? How do you do accounts receivable and accounts payable? How do you do the marketing programs for all these things? And so that on that side, it got me more involved in building communities and sort of organizing volunteers, which became, later ended up becoming a job for me at Datadog, where I ran our community team for a while. So from a skill set perspective, I would say getting involved early in community endeavors, events, programs, clubs, things like that are huge if you're just getting started. So I don't know how many kids you have listening to the show over the or maybe it's just or parents, but I would encourage involvement in those types of things. It's been huge for me in my own development.
You must hear that from the people who've been speakers at your events too, and how important it has been for them to be part of a conference that puts them outside of their comfort zone, I expect.
Yeah, we get a bit of that, especially we have a track that we run specifically for kids. So we call it Scale the Next Generation. And it's a track entirely by K through 12 students. It tends to be, usually junior high and high school, but we get all ages. And the kids that have spoken there have gone on to do amazing things. There's a young girl named Kyla Banks who started with us when she was 12, talking about graphic design and other things she was doing with Linux and open source, and later moved on to, came back and spoke many times, but she's, as a result of, starting there, I don't want to take too much credit for it. She's also amazing. Right. But she started there and moved on to Keynote, OSCON, and, a bunch of Linux Foundation events. And, she's been interviewed on MSNBC and, got invited to the White House. And now she's in her second year of college, I believe. And so, we've watched in 20 years, we've not just watched the industry change, but also watched a number of our community members grow from just getting started to being, well into their careers or in college or later. So,
and it's not just about the speakers. How do you help the community who attends the event, in some respects, learn and gain knowledge, and in some respects, move a little bit outside of their own comfort zones? Because I know people who are deep into, programming and and other technical aspects of what it takes to have an online presence are so deep into that they don't get those opportunities. So how do you see that coming through with the community itself?
One of the things we've done is try to make the event very approachable, both in terms of engaging with other community members at the event, but also just in terms of cost. We work with we work with our sponsors to cover most of our costs so that our tickets are very, very cheap. We offer scholarship programs to cover younger students, like in those K-12 programs that want to come out and attend the event. So like LAUSD in the past, the Los Angeles School District has even sent busloads of kids to come out and learn about open source at scale. But we also put together more structured programs, whether it's that kids track, or this year we're running an open source career day where we're helping folks work on their resumes, do interviews, learn how to talk about the work that they do. I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we often have as engineers is we do amazing work, but we don't know how to present it to others, and so they can't. Then we don't necessarily get valued for that amazing work, and so. We're looking to put together. We've had a number of tracks over the years, and this year we're running that career day where we're looking to help people better present themselves and better share the successes they've had, so that they can be, they can get further on in their careers in the way that they would like, or find jobs working with open source or Linux or containers or security. They know that they may have not had before. So,
such a strong core to have. And then you can trace that then to technology developments and such. And one of the things I noticed was like, what were some of the hot stories? What were some of the trends? And like in the beginning, I saw it's Linux 2.5 was the hot star.
Yeah.
And those were, and there was I love the sponsor statements from the companies at the first event. And Sun Microsystems wrote, Sun Microsystems Inc. Linux distribution is now delivered on the Sun LX50. The first in a family of Linux servers that provide a flexible solution for applications that live on the edge of the network.
Yep.
Linux is consistent with Sun's computing vision of employing open standard and non-proprietary interfaces to develop products and services that address the needs of a variety of environments. Yep. It almost speaks to today, where we come.
Well, so, I think whether you look at our sponsors or our speakers, I think the trends, one of the fun things about Scale has been just being able to watch the trends of our space and sort of this open ecosystem. In the first scale, most of our sponsors were hardware vendors, folks like Sun and MSC and others that were, they wanted to sell you silicone that, that could run Linux. And so they cared about Linux because it let people run more compute on their equipment and they could make more money doing that way. Folks like, I don't mean to neglect IBM. They were there as well with their power devices and other things supporting that. As time went on, it sort of moved up the stack. And a lot of what we were hearing from were companies or developers that were writing the software that happened to run on these open platforms or services that were powered by them. There was a year where, there's probably 2 or 3 years where VoIP was really big. Projects like Asterisk coming out, with the folks from Digium and Sangoma and others talking about how you could do open source, how could you power your telephony systems with open source. I think I probably looked at 100 Asterisk related, VoIP proposals in like probably 2004, 2005. Yeah. As time has shifted, I mean, we're now talking about, when the cloud was relatively new, it was a lot of talks about like, how do you get Linux running on AWS or how do you get Linux running in, another cloud provider. These days, the popular topics tend to be security. We get a ton of interest in security, whether it's on the supply chain side or just in general, securing your software and your platforms. Containers and the whole cloud native space is from all the coverage that you do over at the New Stack. That's huge. So we see a ton of topics there. And what's interesting is when one of those topics blows up, you start to see it not just in the track about that. Like I don't just hear about containers in a track about containers. Every talk at scale will likely mention containers in some way. I would be willing to bet that there's a training on how to do like open source graphics on your desktop, using open source software. I'd be willing to bet there'll be some amount of containers in that too. It's just these things, these trends show up and they eat up the entire space, and they make all of our as they look to make all of our lives easier in terms of how we deploy our software, run our software, or just become the standard in how people work. So
I was looking at the history of the events and I looked for these certain themes like you're talking about.
Yeah.
And in 2010, there was a lot of talk about Amazon and dominating the cloud market with Amazon Web Services. There was also an intro to Python class, which speaks to then, now here we are. We see Python really jumping forward as kind of the, programming language, for instance, for machine learning, and like data science, and so many other things.
Yeah. One of my favorite scale stories is I think I learned this years later. Jerome Petrozzoni, who's like I think was the evangelist for Docker, and I think he was doing like 2 Docker talks a day for years straight type of a thing. I found out later, at another event recently, he told me like Scale was his first time giving a public talk, and he just wanted to come out and talk about Docker. Docker was the new and exciting thing, and we got to bring him out on stage there. So, this is. Again, another person who I by no means mean to take credit for his work. He's done amazing stuff in terms of getting the world of containers available and understandable to many.
So if you were going to have, I'm sorry.
We love being love that I keep hearing these stories of being the launching pad for new things that people are trying.
So if you were going to, and this is going to be my last question, if you're going to jump forward 5 years into the future, and you were going to look back at this 20th anniversary event, what would be the themes that you're seeing coming through the pipeline for talks that you will think you might have some focus on in 5 years' time from now?
So I think looking at the schedule just as it is today, what you'll see is very, very heavy on the sort of the cloud native story. Mm-hmm. If I look at the trends of things that are starting to pop up more and more talks on, one is privacy, where we saw a bunch of proposals around privacy and personal data, which is, I guess, not a surprising trend given just what we've been seeing in the news the last couple of years. But it seems like people are doing a lot of work around that, and I don't know. Ask me in 5 years if that came to fruition. But I think we'll start to see a lot more talks in that space. That's a big one. I think we've seen a lot on the open data front, whether it's things on all these new AI technologies we're talking about, and how to maintain them, how to keep them relevant, and how to keep open source relevant in a world where the data set is almost as important as the software that processes it. That's another area that I think we'll probably look back on and see a lot more from. Well,
again, the Scale event is March 9th through 12th at the Pasadena Convention Center in Pasadena, California. What else would you add about the event and how people can get involved and participate?
So one, I just want to call out, we do have the promo code TNS50 for the new stack, 50% off. So viewers can get can register and get 50% off the registration with that code TNS50. And we're we'd love to have you out, whether you're looking to just come out and learn and get started with Linux and open source and the cloud. We have a bunch of getting started workshops for you. If you got kids that are looking to get into STEM, that are interested in STEM topics and computer science, bring them out for our kids track on March 11th. And if you want to help out with the event, just drop us an email, info@socallinuxexpo.org. We're always looking for more volunteers to help make the event a success. Everybody that's involved with Scale is a volunteer in one way or another, and that's been how we've run the event for 20 years and how we plan to keep doing it. Just really being community focused, community driven. So we'd love for you to be part of that. And yeah, thanks for having me on the show, Alex. It's been a lot of fun chatting about the history here.
Ilan, I hope to make it to your event one of these days, and it seems like such a fun community. And I know a lot of the people who you have on your speaker list. I've seen names pop up even back from the early days who still have, still like who I know, just not through your event, but just otherwise. So you really are such an important part of really the overall worldwide open source community. And so thank you very much for all that you've done, because it really has that kind of that ethos that I think is so needed now in open source and technology circles. So we appreciate all your good work.
Thanks for supporting us, Alex.
If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, you can always subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're on all the major social media platforms. You can always find us at thenewstack.io. We hope to see you soon.